to-do list. So this could just be a daily to-do list. Everything we discussed earlier was like a system for storing all your to-dos and doing a weekly review, but it's good to have just a daily to-do list to look at on a daily basis that you can mark things off one by one as you accomplish them. Research shows that there's motivation in checking things off a list. So if you have the list in front of you and you'll check them off, you'll be able to accomplish more than if you didn't have a list. All right. What about procrastination? So what is procrastination? This is a delay in starting or completing an intended task or course of action when the delay may have negative consequences. Or when we intend to do something and need to do something, but feel bad for not doing it and procrastinating. So basically, procrastination is when you have something you need or want to do, but you're not doing it and you feel bad about it. That's procrastination. And procrastination many times prevents us from getting the things done we need to do. So we need to figure out a way to deal with it. So the book's going to give us some techniques for that. But first of all, why do we procrastinate? A couple big reasons is anxiety and perfectionism. So when we're looking at a task we need to complete, there's probably some positive and some negative aspects to that task that we have in mind when we think about it. And the book talks about this thing called the negativity bias, which is where in our brain we weigh things that are negative more highly than things that are positive. And we focus on that negative, and thinking about those negative aspects of a task we don't want to do can cause us anxiety and cause us to not want to get started. The other thing that causes procrastination is perfectionism. If you want to do something really perfect, or you feel like getting something perfect is really, really important, you may put it off because you're afraid, what if it's not perfect? And that fear can make you not want to get started, because if you don't start, you can't mess up. But that's not helpful, and it could cause you to never get started. So we need to figure out how to deal with procrastination. All right, so here is another tool. I don't see in the book. Well, in this book, it talks about where it comes from. There's a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I don't know and they get some other sources too, but I've also seen this called the Eisenhower Matrix, coming from President Eisenhower. And this is a quadrant that basically take all your to-do items and you group them into 1 or 4 quadrants. Now across the top you have urgency. How urgent is the task? On the left side you have importance. How important is the task? So as you can see here, this side's importance, high and low. So quadrant 1 and quadrant 3, the top 2 are the high important quadrants. And the bottom's the low important quadrants. And then from an urgency perspective, across top here, highs on the left, lows on the right. So quadrant 1 and quadrant 2 are the high urgency quadrants. And quadrant 3 and 4 are the low urgency quadrants. So what this gives you is each quadrant is either high or low urgency and high or low importance. So let's start with quadrant 1. Quadrant 1 is your tasks that are highly important and highly urgent. So obviously these are the ones you want to do as soon as possible. Quadrant 2 are the bottom left corner. They're low in importance, but they're highly urgent. So these are things that are very time sensitive, but they're not very important. And often we find ourselves spending more time in this area than we should because of the fact they're not very important. And the book talks about how as humans, we seem to gravitate more towards doing things that are urgent versus important. So we kind of naturally want to do things in this category. And this could be checking email constantly, attending more meetings that are necessary, that kind of thing. Sometimes this could be things that it's just easy to check off your to-do list and you feel like you accomplished something, but you really didn't because it wasn't that important. All right, quadrant 3. Quadrant 3 are things that are very important, but they're low urgency. These are often really big things that can make a big difference in your life long term, but because they're not urgent, we often put them off. So as I said, we gravitate towards things that are urgent naturally. So because of that, we often don't do the things that are important but aren't urgent. So one part of avoiding procrastination and better time management and self-management is making sure we make time for things that are important but not urgent. These are often the things that have the biggest benefit in the long run. And finally is quadrant 4. Quadrant 4 are things that are low on importance and low on urgency. So these are things that you want to basically try to do as little of as possible because they're not important nor are they urgent. All right, so going back to avoiding procrastination, when I say going back, this is related to avoiding the time management matrix. It helps with that. But here's 2 more tools: visualization and targeted self-talk. So you may have heard of visualization from athletes. Athletes often will visualize the thing they're going to do, whether it's making a shot or completing, like if you're an Olympian, like a high jump, whatever your sport action, your sport is. Often they will do visualization techniques before they actually perform their sport, or as a way of training for the sport. And what the book talks about is the fact that the brain can't tell much difference between what we visualize and what we actually do. So by visualizing how you want to behave in a certain situation, you can train your brain to do better whatever that is do better at whatever that is you're visualizing about. Maybe you visualize yourself, taking on tasks you procrastinate about, for example. Or maybe there's something you're afraid of doing and you visualize yourself doing it with confidence. The other technique is targeted self-talk. It's kind of like a pep talk, or you may have heard of affirmations, where you say sentences to yourself that the sentences themselves embody the way you want to think or the way you want to be as a person. And by saying these things constantly, you help shape your brain and teach your old brain how you want to think. You're doing that metacognition and higher order thinking. You're exerting control using your new brain over your old brain by programming it with these thoughts through targeted self-talk of how you want to behave. Now here's some other techniques for overcoming procrastination. First one is maximizing your prime time. So this is about taking advantages of kind of your own personal rhythm. Some people are more energetic and have more motivation in the morning. Some people are more so in the evening. I think most people seem to be more often in the morning. But if there's a certain time of day you have more energy and motivation, that's the time to do those tasks that you keep wanting to put off and dread doing. Also, on this slide here, this quadrant 3, the things that are important but not urgent, that's a great time to do those things that you keep putting off. So use your time of day where you're most on to do those hardest tasks, the tasks you've been putting off, the ones that make the most difference. Second tip is just get started. That sounds easy, but there's a little more to it here. So if you have a task that you're having trouble getting started on, break it down into subtasks. Find out just one small thing you can do to get started. Often, if you'll just get started on some part of it, it won't be as hard to get started because you're just committing to doing something very small. But also, once you get started on that one small thing, you may decide to keep going because you have momentum. Or because you accomplished that, the next small task that you have to do for that item you're working towards may be easier. So just get started by finding something small you can do to move forward. That next step that's tiny and not intimidating. Next is use deadlines. So we discussed how the brain naturally gravitates towards wanting to do tasks that are urgent. So one way of taking advantage of that is to set deadlines for things. Make something more urgent than it was prior. And then lastly, that's just your suggestions. So basically, for number 4 is, all of us are different. So just think about, maybe you have some techniques that you've run across or you've learned from other people that maybe help you overcome procrastination. Each of us are different, and different things work for different people. So to think about kind of how you behave in the past in regard to managing your time, and figure out if there are ways you can kind of manipulate your schedule or your task management system to take advantage of your strengths and weaknesses. All right, so moving on to another topic, the topic of stress and managing stress. So there's a lot of things in life that cause stress. This slide here just gives some examples of things: death of a family member, divorce, personal illness, getting married. There's lots of things that cause stress. Let's see, I'm going to skip that one. One of the things that can cause stress, that hopefully you never have to deal with, is if you have an office bully. So the book very briefly has this list of things to do in that situation. I'm just going to go over them, and then we'll move on. So if you have an office bully at work, here's a good way to deal with it. First, document everything. So by document it, you don't have to rely on your memory, but also it shows some evidence of what happened you can fall back on if you have to provide evidence. Second, confront the bully. Some bullies may not know they're being a bully, or they may only be being a bully because they think they can get away with it. So sometimes by confronting a bully, that could stop it. If needed, seek support. Ask for help with the situation. That may mean talking to your manager or HR or something like that. Another, do your job well. It's really easy when you have a stressful work environment to let it impact your job. So focus on the things you can control. Focus on doing your job and making sure you're doing your job well. You don't want to let this situation impact your job. Take care of yourself. Once again, it's all about taking care of you and the things you need to accomplish. Go to the top. That means that's going to the manager, as I already kind of talked about. And then don't perpetuate the cycle. Don't bully others because you're being bullied. Real quick, I'm going to check the book. Let's see. Yeah, make sure anything else I want to add to that. Okay, we're good on that. All right. So let's talk about stress versus stressors. So a stress is an individual's physiological, mental, and emotional response to external stimuli that place physical or psychological demands on the individual and create uncertainty and lack of personal control when important outcomes are at stake. So basically, stress is your own body's response to thing or stimuli in your environment that create uncertainty and a feeling of loss of control. Now, stressors, these are those external things, the stimuli. These are external forces or events that are the stimuli that you're reacting to as stress. So stressors are external forces or events, and stress is your physical response to those stressors. That's the difference. Now, it's easy for us to think that all stress is bad, and that's not the case. It turns out that a certain amount of stress is actually very helpful. Without any stress, we would be bored and lazy and not productive. It turns out that a certain level of stress is actually good for us and causes a positive outcome in our well-being and behavior. But there's a point, as this graph shows, after which where it swiftly declines and starts causing decreased performance and eventually can lead to exhaustion. Now, there's also different types of stress. There's kind of positive stress and negative stress. And that's my words, not the book's. So you have challenge stress, which I'm calling positive stress, and threat stress, which I'm calling negative stress. So a challenge stress fires you up. Whenever you see a stress as a challenge, it increases your focus, your alertness, your efficiency, and productivity. So these are stresses that me adding to the book, this is outside the book, but to me these challenge stresses are things that you feel within your control. You're making a choice to do. Therefore, you are motivated to do them. The threat stress, once again using my words, not the books, are stresses where you feel like these things are being done to you. And these things make us feel anxiety, fear, depression, anger, irritated, or could cause us to have trouble making decisions. And physically, it could result in headaches, insomnia, and stomach problems. Those are some symptoms that you might have if you're getting too much threat stress. All right, so the chapter ends by talking about developing your ability to manage stress. Now, it discusses something called type A people and type B people. You may have heard of this before. So type A people are people who are usually extremely competitive, impatient, aggressive, very devoted to their work, and as a result, they usually experience more stress-related illness. They're high-energy people, and they generally seek positions of power and responsibility. So this type of person, type A as they call it, usually experiences more stress just because of the type of person they are. Type B people are people who have less of these qualities of being extremely competitive, impatient, aggressive, and so forth. And as a result, they usually have less stress in their life. In part, that's because they're more balanced and relaxed, and they have less conflict with other people too because of less of those personality traits. And this isn't saying type A or type B is better or worse. It's just pointing out the fact that the more kind of type A you are, the kind of more stress it kind of brings into your life often. And sometimes type of people, depending on how it manifests, could bring stress to those around them as well. And then finally, in the last slide, about developing and managing stress. So first, we want to try to seek and destroy sources of stress. So basically, you want on a regular basis to just think about what things in your life are causing you stress, and are there ways you can eliminate or reduce those things? Because prevention is the best way to manage stress if it's possible. Next, find meaning and support. So if the thing you're doing, your job, for example, is stressful, but you find meaning in it, meaning you find value in it, like you feel like you're a good fit for the role, and you're adding value, you're making an impact. That's meaning. If you have that feeling, those stresses aren't gonna bother you as much. Also, social support is very important. The book talks about something called the buffering hypothesis. Research has shown if you have a high degree of social support from family and friends, the adverse effects of stress will be much less on you. So it's really good to have social support from family and friends. Another technique is meditating and managing your energy. So meditating, which is usually, there's all kind of things in meditation. The book doesn't even go into any detail on it, but meditating is basically where you take time kind of for quiet to yourself, either working on trying to focus on something or trying not to focus on things. But it's time to yourself in quiet. And there's lots of videos on YouTube you can watch for different types of meditation. But it's found to be really, really good at helping your body better manage stress. And if you're in a stressful situation, it's messing up your ability to focus, you can stop and meditate, kind of get recentered again, and kind of start over, kind of reset yourself. So it's good for that. Some people do it, every morning, every evening, or both, or throughout the day, whenever they need to, just kind of reset. So it can be a really good tool in your tool belt for managing stress. Next technique is getting organized and managing your time. We just discussed that. So if you are organized and manage your time well, that's going to help a whole lot in reducing and managing your stress. And then finally, finding work-life balance. So a lot of people who are really good at managing stress have things outside of work that they enjoy doing, hobbies, and different things they enjoy that they take part in, and it kind of helps balance them and helps a lot in managing stress. All right, so that is the end of Chapter 3 on managing yourself to get things done. I hope you found this overview helpful. If you need anything, please reach out. Hope you have a great week.